Hi everyone, I hope you're well. So today I want to talk about writing fanfiction, and I've talked about this general topic before, but I want to talk about something a bit more controversial today, something that I haven't seen that many people discuss, just a couple of videos here and there, and I think that maybe some spaces find to be more unacceptable and immoral than others, but I don't know, it's kind of a nuanced topic, so the point is tell me what you think, but I'll tell you kind of what experience I have with it and what I think about it. If you have seen my channel before, you might have noticed that I'm really into watching and reading reviews of bad or I guess lowbrow books like After by Anna Todd. And specifically with that one, I remember that when I was making a video where I mentioned it, at one point I thought, well, it's kind of weird how that's supposed to be about Harry Styles, right? Because he's a real person. He's not even like a character that you could know and make a fanfic about because you know what their character is like and that kind of thing. Because you can't really know what Harry Styles is really like. All that you know about him is from interviews and, things like that. And, maybe social media or whatever, but even that, you don't really have an accurate idea of what their sort of character flaws are, in the same way that a real, well, a fictional character would have their flaws, which actually makes it easier for you to make a more interesting story using them, or make a user character for fanfiction or what have you. But then I realized that I myself have actually done that before. It's just that I had kind of forgotten about it. I had left that, my mind had just like completely erased those memories of me writing real people fanfictions, as these things are often called. So some years back, I still write fanfiction, mostly of Ikesen. Lately, I'm still working on one about Logan from X-Men, Wolverine. And both, but I have written a couple of real people fanfictions. Both of them are on Rockfic, which is a place where you can write fanfiction about band members and stuff like that. And oh my god, I'm just gonna say it. I wrote fanfics about Bruce Dickinson and Alex Webster, the bassist from Cannibal Corpse. So yeah, there's that. It's out there for you now. It's out there now. So, but here's the thing. I think sometimes when you write, you're pretty much always just thinking of a sort of potential audience. For me, I've always felt like I was simply writing for people like me, or I was writing things that I felt like maybe we should see more of, or maybe are lacking, in what I have been able to read before. I'm thinking of things that other people will, of course, also like and might be interested in. So in the case of all these, and I write just general fiction, of course. I don't write just fanfiction, and especially not just real people fanfiction. To me, these sort of potential audience behind writing these real people fanfics about these band members, this potential audience was other fangirls, if you will, of the bands, and other people who have a crush on the frontman or the bassist or whatever. And to me, that's the people that I was writing for, and the people that were going to look for these stories and find them. And I think it's sort of a writer's nature to write things that they themselves would like to read, and stuff that they think that other people might enjoy too. I myself never actually found any fanfiction about band members, or at least not of the bands that I liked and cared about, until I started to actively look for it. I knew that people wrote fanfiction about One Direction or whatever, and that kind of stuff was sort of like widely known, but I didn't know that people actually wrote fanfiction about Iron Maiden members. That was completely something that I didn't know and didn't expect until I actively started looking for that. And of course, that also depends on how famous that person is or that band is. Obviously for something like After, which obviously After was modified in names and stuff like that so that it couldn't be called, so that it could be published as an actual original story. And of course, the fact that he was incredibly famous, like a really known celebrity, made After also very known. And the thing is, in Rockfic, for some reason, it doesn't really tend to show up in Google searches very at the top. You kind of have to like really dig to find that website and to find fanfics on that website. And even on that website, on rockfic.com, you have to make an account for most stories you have to make an account in order to be able to read them. So there's no way that you're gonna just like randomly stumble into some fanfiction that you essentially saw against your will or anything like that. But regardless, I do think there is something to be morally said about it, in the sense of, you know, you're writing all these fictional things about real people who probably want to have a sense of privacy and don't want to be written about and sort of misrepresented and represented in ways that are sort of strangely sexualized or what have you, by people who, you know, they've never met. And when I think about it, I myself, if I was a celebrity, I probably wouldn't like to know that there's people who write that kind of story about me, you know, where I'm like an idealized version of myself and I'm doing all these romantic and sexual things with someone with a character who's supposed to be representing the author of the story. Thinking about it for a moment, if someone like Percy Kinson or maybe Alex Webster or whatever were to Google, you know, my name, their name, plus fanfiction, they would find exactly that. And granted, it would probably be from like Wattpad or something, because, you know, that website probably, I get the feeling, or I think it's actually proven in some way, that you can pay Google money so that your website shows up first on the searches, but, you know, whatever, I digress. The thing is, if he looked through enough searches, he would probably find my story at some point. And would I like that? No. I wouldn't like that. I would be really embarrassed to know that any of them found that. And I figured that maybe he wouldn't be very comfortable with it either. And I would guess the same thing about either of them. And either of them would probably not really like the idea if they were to find it. Obviously, I don't think either of them have much of a reason to spend their time looking that up. But the point is that at the end of it all, I am writing stories about people that are real and that could potentially find those stories themselves. Now, not to justify it, but I obviously doubt that either of them would ever look up fanfics of themselves, because for one, they don't really have that much of a strong social media presence. In the case of someone like a YouTuber who there's YouTubers who have had quite a few fanfictions written about them. I do think there's another level in which it's just kind of a matter of time until they either stumble upon those fanfics themselves or they're told by another fan, like, hey, someone's writing fanfiction about you. I think that's kind of what makes it an absolute no-no, you know, the point where you're going out of your way to make it known to a real person that there is fanfiction written about them, because that is most likely going to make them uncomfortable, for them to know that, you know, people asking in interviews, for example, like, are you aware that there's fanfictions of you? Or maybe tweeting at someone telling them, hey, there's this fanfic written about you. Especially if they're doing that in such a lighthearted way, in which often people do that because they want to have their reactions, they want to see them be kind of uncomfortable, or maybe make fun of those people. But even if they do make fun of them, that doesn't mean that they won't be uncomfortable with the idea of those fanfictions being written about them and being published online for a lot of people to read. Now, do I think that overall writing real people fanfiction is wrong? Well, I don't think it's necessarily ethically impeccable, but I also don't want to be hypocritical, because I probably will still seek out and read it from time to time. At the same time, I understand people who do think that it's kind of creepy or that it's kind of bordering, it's kind of on this line between not right and okay. I think it's definitely a bit more delicate than fan fictions about fictional characters or historical figures or people that have been dead for a very long time, and their children and their children's children have also probably been there for a while. So no, I don't really think it's equivalent. I don't think it would be a good argument to make it somehow be seen as equivalent to just your regular fictional people fan fiction, because it's definitely on another category and it's something that is a bit more delicate to discuss and to deal with. And I think it should definitely be kept in spaces where you kind of have to seek it out specifically in order to find it, so that people can't really, stumble upon it accidentally, or people who don't want to find it will find it, or what have you. That's kind of what makes the biggest difference, I think. And there's also that other point that I spoke about in the beginning, where I was talking about the fact that we don't know these people at the end of it all. We just idolize them and we kind of have a crush on them. And the way that we are able to write stories about them is by sort of having this idealized version of them placed in a story, and that only loosely represents them a little bit. For years, I think I've had this tendency to develop a crush on any kind of frontman or a specific member of a band that I'm really into. And I think there has to be some sort of understanding, both from the reader and anyone who sees it from the viewer's perspective and from the writer, that whenever you write fiction about a real person, you're writing based on your interpretation of them. Even that happens when you write about fictional characters, of course, but it's more important, I think, to keep in mind when you write about real people, that you're writing their character based on what you feel about them and what your interpretation is of them. And there has to be this really clear separation between fantasy and reality, in the sense of, this is the fantasy version that you have in your mind about this person, and this is the real person who has basically nothing to do with that idealized version. And it also makes for a weird moment in writing or developing a character where you have to invent flaws for them to have. And it's strange to invent flaws for someone who, not only is that a real person that you've never met, but also you've never really had any knowledge of what their flaws could really be, aside from maybe if they're a huge celebrity, being a bit cocky or what have you. But in the case of maybe a band member or something like that, all the things that you have seen about them have most likely been positive things, filtered things through either interviews or social media, or little snippets like that make you think that there's no real flaw. So you basically have to see kind of what it is that they could have to make them less than perfect. And that's a bit strange to think about, because they obviously, as people, have flaws, but you kind of have to guess what they are because you've never met them, and you've never you most likely have never even spoken to them. And even if you have, that doesn't really give you a good idea of what exactly they're like as people. So it's kind of difficult and very complex, now that I think about it, to write fan fiction about real people, and to just generally make fiction or make stories that include real people or representations of real people as one of the main characters, because not only because of the implications of that in real life, but also because it's very difficult to take those aspects of real life and put them into fiction. Because of course in fiction you're gonna have to be represented in a somewhat negative way at some point, or being presented as someone who made something that was wrong, or has some sort of big flaw that can't really be overlooked, and maybe the conflict of the story is about that, or anything like that. There's always going to be something like that, even in the story, the trilogy, or I don't know what it is, but the series of books after. He's the character that is supposed to represent Harry Styles has this sort of really bad personality, this really abusive relationship where he's the abusive partner. And it's strange, because in a way you can tell that it's sort of an idealized version of him, because he's made to be sort of really attractive and all these things, and also because why would you have him as the love interest if you didn't consider him to be attractive or have you. But at the same time, there's these things that are being applied to Harry Styles, even though there's no particular reason why you would think of him as an abusive partner. And if you did, why would you have him be the love interest and then present that as a positive thing? Although of course that's already a different discussion that doesn't necessarily have much to do with the main point of this video. But I think it's interesting that someone who is such a huge fan of Harry Styles actually made him to some degree seem as if he was abusive, which is obviously something negative. And of course we're talking about fiction, so it's not like I'm accusing this author Anna Todd of wanting to misrepresent him. Obviously that wasn't obviously not the point either way, but it's kind of interesting how, even though she's obviously a fan of him, she represented him in the story in a way that wasn't very positive. but again, that's just kind of the, I guess in partly that's the kind of thing that has to happen when you take something that you love and you have to put it in fiction. And of course the story has to have some sort of conflict happening or something interesting going on, and the characters have to be flawed in some way for the story to be interesting. So that's pretty much all that I wanted to talk about, and I want to know how you feel about the morality in writing fan fictions about real people. So tell me what you think down below. I'll see you in the next one.